jet lag is what you get when you travel over many time zones, and as you at 500 or 600 miles an hour. So your body clock, and you don't get that in a sailing ship. You don't get that even in a big ship because they don't go fast enough. But when you're in a jet plane, you go into that time zone. The body clock, you have a body clock that you know it goes through the day, and it's a light-dark cycle clock. It's called a circadian clock, and that circadian clock is what basically sets your. The circadian clock is what sets your basically light-dark and your activity cycle. So you wake up, in the morning, you go to sleep at night, and you follow that. Circadian means circadian, about 24 hours. And so having taught anatomy and physiology, is well aware of that. But the thing I become aware of is the fact that there is also a meridian clock. And so that's 24 hours, because there's 12 meridians, and there's a 2-hour peak flow in each meridian. That means a 24-hour clock. But this is an energetic clock. It's not set by the same light-dark cycles. And so, therefore, when you are in an airplane and going quickly, you're at this point here, where you leave, your departure. Then as you fly, your body clock keeps running on that time, the circadian clock. So by the time you get to the next place, you're not on universal time, you're in some other time between this one and that one. And then it takes you usually about a day for every time zone to fully resync with the new place. And that's what causes desynchronisis. It's a great term, and desynchronisis is jet lag. And so what I discovered is there are acupoints, there are what the Chinese recognize biorhythmic acupoints, and these acupoints you can hold to change different sets of timing. And so I researched a set of points, and not the ones that most people normally use, but these, and so it's a whole new thing. Out of 24 acupoints, there's 76 combinations. Because it's not, but they say, oh, which point do you hold? No, it's which point, and they change all the time depending on your time where you are and the time where you land. So this is really amazing, because this is an answer to a 21st century problem with a 5,000-year-old technology coupled with a 21st century technology. Right there. Because how do you find the acupoints? Little videos. You look at them and you see them. And how do you know which ones to hold? There's an algorithm, a complex mathematical equation that calculates and tells you this one and this one. And all you do is hold this one and this one on this side for 1 minute, this one and this one on that side for 1 minute, and no more jet lag. So it really does work this way. I mean, I developed it like 25 years ago for me. And then people started saying, you just travel with 32 hours and you're looking like you're not sleepy, or you seem to be totally, how do you do that? And I said, oh, I have this thing I do. So then I made it for people, just a kind of a sheet with paper and things. But there's a lot of factors that are a little more difficult. So sometimes it worked for people, sometimes it didn't. And then I made it into a little 2-wheel jet lag decoder, a departure wheel and a arrival wheel. But the trouble is that you had to be able to know where the points were. Once it told you what point it was, then you had to find it. And a little picture is a little difficult to see. There's a little hand like this that got a dot on it. Well, where is that dot on my hand? We're with this technology. You just look at the picture and it shows you, put your fingers here, down between the tendons, and oh, the dent, because by the overlay, voice overlay, you can't see a dent, but you can feel it. You can see the thing. So it's a very simple technology. It just requires a short time, and you could do things like 5 or 6 different days of preparation, or you could just get there and hold the points for 5 minutes. Your choice. So it's just from my accident led me to this point, and then it led me to the solution to this problem, solving my own problem, and now it solves many people's problems. Right. And I have many people who say it's changed my life. Like I have a concert pianist that lives in Hong Kong and flies over the world, and she said, this has just changed my life, because I get there, I don't have to spend a day recovering. I'm there and ready to go. So thank you.
So Ted and Charles are going to be in the Venture Cafe with their app, Uplift. And you can get a deeper understanding of how that works if you want to visit their table there. So thank you so much. Do you want us to stay here? With that?
Yeah, that'd be easy.
Yeah, that's easy. So our next speaker, Justin Wright from Habitus Incorporated, he's been a real ally for the wellness team at CIC. He has come in and offered us trainings. He's did a pilot session with our sales team on negotiation. And personally, he's just been a real hero in my life and like learning about emotional intelligence and some conflict resolution skills. So with no further ado, Justin.
Thanks, Shakti. Should we hang out?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, that was amazing, and I fly all the time, so I'm going to come visit your booth.
Yeah.
I definitely need that.
Yep.
Yeah, I will. So I want to talk about the aspect of wellness, which is how do we make it happen? There's a lot of amazing research on what to do to be healthier, happier, and better relationships. But how do we actually do this stuff? And a lot of us, myself included, often start from a place of, I'll just do it myself. You hear an incredible story like that, and you're like, wow, you just have willpower and succeed, right? It's obvious. So I want to tell you a story about my failing miserably in doing that, and some lessons that came out of that for me, and then give you a chance to sort of think about where that might show up in your lives. So, keep an eye on the time. Okay, so I am home for Christmas. It's this past year. My sister is going to have a baby, actually in a few weeks. So we're hoping everything's going to be wonderful. Yeah. And so I'm home for Christmas to spend time with her and spend time with my parents. And I'm out for a walk with my dad. I'm in Pennsylvania. It's really cold. And we're walking out in the fields behind our house. And our conversation goes something like this. Dad, you really need to slow down. I feel like your life is out of control. You move so fast, and it's bad for your health. You really got to pump the brakes. Dad, yeah, that sounds good. Happy to do that. I'm like, okay, well, that was easy. But there's a few things I want to finish first. Like what? He's like, well, I want to flip our district. I was like, okay. Pennsylvania is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country, for the record. I was like, okay, no big deal, just flip the district, cool, what else? He's like, well, there's a lot going on with my nonprofit right now, and I feel like I need to stay involved. He's trying to transition out, right? He's like, I need to stay involved, okay. And I need to help plan your sister's wedding. I was like, God, that really doesn't sound like resting, right? So, to me, this sounds ridiculous. To you, it might sound like, whatever, the man's got a lot on his plate, that's fine. The context is, 2 weeks earlier, he'd been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is a pretty beatable cancer. 6 rounds of chemo, and you're fine. Not everyone's fine, but that's what we're all hoping. So I go to my friend Bill, who's a cancer survivor himself and a doctor. Great resource. I'm like, Bill, what do I need to know about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma? And he says, well, the thing you need to know is, probably he'll survive, unless he dies. I was like, what? He's like, well, no, here's what I mean. He probably will survive the cancer. The chemo almost always beats it. What will kill him is the chemo will wreck his immune system, and if he doesn't rest, his immune system doesn't recover fast enough and he dies of pneumonia. I was like, oh. Okay, so I go home, and now I'm walking with Dad, having this conversation. So I just lay into him. I'm just like, Dad, you have to do, it's 18 weeks. You've lived a long, successful life. What is 18 weeks off? Come on. And he's like, yeah. You know what, Justin, this makes sense. I'm going to take a break. I was like, whew. I had to work hard for that, but, this is what sons are for. So I come back and check in a couple weeks later, full-blown working on the wedding. All in, flip. He's just hosted, he's had a round of chemo, and then hosted a fundraiser. I was like, what are you doing? I thought we talked about this. So now our relationship's starting to suffer, because I'm getting more and more aggressive, right? We've got a dynamic where I'm on one side of the table saying, you have to rest. And he's on the other saying, yeah, I will. And it's not going well. So I'm making 2 fundamental mistakes here that are leading me into a really bad relationship with Dad and potentially not having a dad, both of which are things I want to avoid. The first mistake I'm making is I'm seeing this as an individual act. He just needs to slow down, right? Obvious. If he slows down, we're good. But it turns out the research on what drives our behavior is starting to show that wellness isn't just an individual act. It certainly is an individual act, but it's not just an individual act. It flows through networks, right? So it flows through networks, and there's really interesting research happening on this that Nataly can tell you more about because it's in her book, where if I start working out more and we're friends, you are more likely to work out. But not just that. You who are friends with him and not friends with me are also more likely to work out. And you who are friends with her, but not friends with him or me. So we have these 3 degrees of influence. So if I want my dad's behavior to change, one thing I can do to influence is just change my own behavior. I said, great, I'm going to start meditating. I'm going to start resting. I'm going to pause between every activity and breathe. I got really intense about it in January. So I did that. And but of course, I wasn't thinking about my network where no one meditates, so I failed utterly. And I had to go out and find some friends who were more into it and get some coaching. Anyway, eventually I got my act together, and I was starting to really meditate every day, really take pauses. I was listening to all this like mindfulness stuff, sort of like you. I was wandering into territory that was new to me, and it was awesome. But my relationship with Dad was still terrible, and he wasn't changing his behavior. So like, what's a son to do? You know, like I'm doing all the right stuff. I'm telling him what to do. That didn't work. I'm doing it, and then it's going to just flow to him through this magical network thing I read about in a book called Connected. That's not working. Okay, so what's wrong here? And it turns out that how it flows matters. So if you imagine you have a synapse, right, which is the connection between 2 neurons. The neuron really can't do anything by itself. I'm not sure I'm that pessimistic about humans, but mostly we're not that useful on our own. It's what flows between us. It's the connections that makes us interesting and useful. But actually, what happens in the synapse matters. There's a bunch of different things that can happen in there, and that will determine what reaction is created. So it's not just as simple as I start exercising, you start exercising. How we communicate, how that message gets sent between us really matters. And I had one of these like, moments, because this is what I teach for a living, is how do you negotiate with people? And fundamentally, I'm in a negotiation with my dad. But I had been approaching it as this first simple, just do the right thing because it's the right thing. And then, as I'll use this cool science I'm learning about networks to change you through changing me, which also didn't work. Okay, so now we're on round 3, 4, probably 25 of this conversation. And I'm taking a step back now and saying, okay, can I reframe this as us being on the same side of the table? So instead of it's me against him, rest later, it's us together solving a problem, which is how do we meet both of our sets of interests? So I first have to ask, what is it that I want out of this? Like, I want to have a living father. Check, thing 1. Right? I also want to have a positive relationship with him. Right? So I don't want to ruin it. We all fall into this dichotomy of, I can be nice, or I can be in relationship with you. Right? Like, I can either get what I want, or we can be friends. And it starts young. You think your grandmother's like, here, have this delicious pie. You're like, okay, oh, what is this? And she's like, did you like it? In that moment, you have to make a choice. Do I preserve my relationship with my grandmother, or am I honest? Okay? And often, everything feels like that. So that was the challenge. I felt like I was stuck. Either I'm saying, Dad, like, get it together, and like throwing ultimatums and doing the aggressive, like, here's what I need. Or I'm just ceding to him and being like, you know what? I'm just going to be a loving son and you can die of pneumonia. Right? But like, that's not an option. I'm not willing to do either of those things. So I had to find a way to frame our dilemma as something we could solve together. And that required me to use some of the negotiation skills from my work. So the first was I identified what are our interests, right? So I said, for me, it's I want a living dad. I want to have a good relationship with him, with respect and honesty. And I need to slow down too, right? I'm telling the same lie he's telling, right? I'm telling the lie, I'll rest when, right? And I'm in my 30s, I'm an entrepreneur, everyone believes me. I'm like, I'll rest once we get this project launched. I'll rest once, and everyone's like, yeah, you probably will. No, I won't. My dad's twice my age, he's been telling the same lie twice as long, and he's still not resting. So I have this problem too, right? So I actually want to solve this myself. And then on my dad's side, he wants to survive, but he also wants to keep his commitments. Right? That's why he's stuck, because he said he's going to flip the whatever district. He said he's going to help my sister set up her wedding. He said he wants to keep his commitments. He wants to avoid pain. And right now, most of that's coming from me and our damaged relationship. He wants to be respected in our family. And he wants to make it through this and really flourish, not just survive. So if I can identify that, if I can step back and go, okay, what do we actually want here? Then I can change the nature of our conversation. Then I can go to him, and instead of saying, Dad, for the umpteenth time, like, get it together. You have to slow down. Like, what do I have to do? All right? I'm getting to a place of anger and desperation and frustration. I can go in and frame it. We're working together. Right? We can sit on the same side of the table and say, Dad, I love you. I want you to survive. I also really want you to flourish, and I get that you're in a tough place. You've made commitments, right? You want to be respected by me and by Mom and by Nora. And I'm struggling with this too. I want to figure out how to slow down, because I'm telling the same lie you're telling, and I can't figure out how to make that change in my life, and I can't figure out how to support you in doing that either. Can we try to figure this out together? Can we get on the same side of the table and think, what would it take for both of us to support each other in this? And he said, like he said the last time, yeah, that sounds good. But this time, we actually then had a conversation about how to do it. And what did that change? I'm still doing the exact same things I was doing before. I'm meditating, I'm pausing. But now all of a sudden, the flow, the way we interconnect has changed. We're actually able to talk to each other. When I found out I was going to be doing this, I bought Nataly's book. And it's great. Highly recommend that you should read it.
I'll give you $5.
Yeah, I'm only halfway through. But anyway, as soon as I got it and I started listening, I was like, oh, this is going to be really helpful. So I sent it to Dad. And he bought it, right? And now he's reading it. Because we're actually able to have stuff flow. That 3 months ago, when I was like, hey, Dad, you really should do this thing. He's like, yeah, right? Nothing. Because we've changed the way the connection is built. So I want to challenge you to think about a relationship in your life, either where, like with me, I'm trying to shift someone else's behavior that I love, or where you're trying to shift your own behavior, but you need someone else's buy-in to help you. Could you shift the conversation from being on either side of the table to actually figuring out, what do I want out of this? Really frame it like, I want, and what do they want? Like, what are their core interests? And then frame it as a shared challenge. And just bring it to them. Like, you don't need to have the answer. Just bring it to them and say, what would you do here? So I want to end with a story that my dad told me actually recently about something he was reading. That there's a story of this woman who's recently divorced, and she's looking for support. So she goes and finds a support group of recently divorced women. And you can imagine that's not a very happy place. And so she's miserable, because everyone's miserable. They just get together and are miserable together. And one of her close friends is like, you have to get out of this place. This is terrible, right? And we can diagnose it's because things flow through networks, including misery. So she's in a miserable network. Misery is flowing to her. No surprises. So her friend says, you have to get out of here. And so she leaves and feels way better and gets better. Friends who are having a happier impact on her. Now, you could end the story there and just say this is a story of networks. But it's not. Because how the information flows matters. Because there's a version of this story where her friend tells her that, she goes back to the group and can't find a way to say, you all make me miserable, I'm leaving. That doesn't feel like a confrontation. She can't bring herself to hurt these people she's become friends with, and she stays. Huge failure, right? Because now she's miserable, she hasn't been honest with them. So she needs to be able to do this, right? She needs to be able to say, what do I want? What do they want? Could I articulate that as a shared challenge? And then bring it to them. I want to be happy. I also want to be friends with you. And right now, what I'm seeing is us all being unhappy together is making us more unhappy. And so I'm trying to figure out what to do. One option is I could leave. Another option is we could change the composition of this group or something. Are you open to having the conversation? And at that point, they're A, more likely to release her. Like if they wanted to stay miserable, they're like, okay, get out. But that she might actually create transformation. So I want to challenge you, in that example you thought of, to see if you can have a conversation that puts you on the same side of the table as a way of creating a shift in wellness in your life.
Thank you.
I got it. Thank you, Justin. That was awesome. I want to introduce our next person, who is Nataly Kogan, who has a book called Happier Now. She has an entrepreneur, speaker, and author on a mission to help millions of their skills by making simple, scientifically backed practices part of their daily life. We're just so...
Okay, so there's no way I can sit, so where do you want me to stand so we can face the fire?
Got it. I got it.
This is my spot?
Yes.
Oh my
Got it.
God. Okay, I'll try. That was so awesome, and this is so awesome. Jet lag, I can't wait to go check that out. Let's see, I'm going to talk, my innovation that I am asking everyone here to consider around happiness is not an innovation of a gadget or a technique or a technology, but it's an innovation in our mindset around it, because that's actually where we are stuck. So there's three, let's see, in 15 minutes. Usually I talk for 90 minutes. Let's see if we can do 90 minutes in 15 minutes. So the first mind shift that I'm asking you guys and gals to consider is that happiness does not come from outside achievements and success. We live in that culture that tells us to. I'll rest when. How many of us think I'll be happy when? How many of you thought that today? If we're really honest, I think all of us in some way. I'll be happy when? Lose weight, gain weight, launch a company, write a book, get home, get out of this car, my plane won't, right? So the other side of that is happiness comes to some lucky ones, right? How many of you are either a person or know someone who's like, oh, I'm just not someone who can be happy? I have two friends like that, right? I'm just a negative person. So I want to challenge that. And by the way, so what I just said, this I'll be happy when, I'm 42. I've spent most of my life with this I'll be happy when. And the reason I got there, so I grew up in the Soviet Union, when it was still the Soviet Union. And when I was 13 years old, my parents and I escaped as refugees. We're Jewish, Jews were persecuted. And so we escaped with almost nothing, something like 6 suitcases, I think you were allowed, 2 suitcases per person. And we lived in refugee settlements in Europe for several months, trying to get permission to come to the US, and then we finally got permission, which was very exciting. Then we landed in the projects outside of Detroit. Very grateful to have welfare and food stamps, but I was 13, you guys. I mean, my daughter just graduated from middle school today. Woo! I mean, remember when we're 13, we're not the kindest people to each other. So here I was, spoke almost no English, had 2 outfits that we got from donation pile, didn't understand anything about American culture. So it was a rough period for me. And I felt so much fear and doubt and self-doubt and anxiety. And the only times that I could escape it, I was really smart and I worked really hard. So the only time that I didn't feel that, when I felt the opposite, happy, was when I achieved something. I remember one of the greatest days that first year was when I got moved from remedial English to normal English. And I was like, this is amazing, and then I went on to do better, and I graduated eventually top of my high school, and I got into a great college, and graduated first in my class in college, and I got all sorts of impressive jobs. I went to work at McKinsey, became a venture capitalist when I was 26 as a woman. I was in New York, but I always give a shout out. My first investment as a venture capitalist was in a little company called Constant Contact that had 20 people in one conference room on 128. I'll never forget, they had 2,100 customers. The history was made, and it was to not my credit, but we invested, I was on board for many years. And so I learned this lesson. I was like, okay, the way you feel happy is you achieve something, then you feel happy, so I'll be happy when. And so I went on this chase of the big happy, because I thought eventually you achieve so many things that you get to nirvana. You earn the right to feel happy all the time. And by the way, in that nirvana, that bliss, nothing goes wrong. You always feel good. So I did that. I achieved it. On the outside, it was amazing. So many accomplishments. My parents had sheets of paper to brag about, By the way, my grandparents thought I was a complete failure because I did not go to graduate school. And if you're a Russian Jew in Russia, you don't go to graduate school, your life is over. So they, for years, didn't tell anyone I worked at McKinsey because they were so embarrassed. Until one day, someone mentioned it on TV, and they were like, wait, our granddaughter worked at McKinsey. And grandparents have the best, aren't they? Mine meant the best pie, though. So all of that was fantastic, except I never could hold on to that happiness, right? I mean, think about the last time you achieved one of your I'll be happy wins, whatever it was. We feel good, right? For a while, it feels really great. It actually really does. But then all of a sudden it doesn't. Like the happiness bubble pops. Why? Well, we're not doing anything wrong. There are two things in our brain that make it impossible for that I'll be happy when to work. Two things. First of all, we're very adaptable. Our brain adapts very quickly to the good and the bad. It's how we survive, right? Change. And so, I'll be happy when I launch, I'm an entrepreneur, I've been launching companies my whole life. I'll be so happy when we raise that round of financing and we release our product and we have enough customers. And you get to that point, and very quickly the brain, I call it in my book, the curse of the moving baseline. So very quickly that exciting thing becomes the new normal. Okay, I'm used to it. And the brain naturally goes, okay, the next thing. And so we're in this constant chase. The other thing that we all unfortunately have is something psychologists call a negativity bias. So all of our brains are more sensitive to negative stimuli than positive stimuli. Some people more than others. My husband, as an example, is someone who, it's a very weak negativity. He's like one of these people, he wakes up every morning and everything's great. We've been married 22 years. I'm like, oh, what's wrong with you? Don't you know all the wrong things that could go wrong? Well, because I'm a Russian Jew. And you know the thing they say about Russians? We're good at three things. Suffering, making others suffer, and complaining about suffering. You guys laugh. It's completely true. So I'm like, whereas my natural set point, my negativity bias is very strong. I wake up every morning in a state of oh my God, everything's going to be horrible, and then I have to work at it. But all of our brains have it, which means when we get that thing that I'll be happy when we get that when, very quickly our brain starts to find things that are wrong with it. It's like last year I launched our Happier at Work training program. So we go into companies and we do these Happier at Work training programs. And my favorite little workshop we do is we ask people talk about a job or an achievement of a job, that you really wanted to do and talk about how it felt. And then how did you feel a month or 2 months later? And it's, I got that job, it was awesome. My commute was annoying, and the colleague who now sits next to me, he makes this weird sound when he's on the phone. Our brain naturally starts to look for these annoying, frustrating, stressful things. It thinks it's helping us survive. Why do we have this negativity bias? Because usually danger comes with negative stimuli. So the brain is constantly scanning the environment for danger, so we notice all the things that are wrong. And so the adaptability of our brain and the negativity bias make it impossible for this I'll be happy when to work. I didn't know any of what I just said. What it took, as it often does, is for me to hit a brick wall, face on, metaphorically. I was about, this was about 6 years. I ran consumer product at a company here called Where. You guys remember? There was a big mobile startup. So I ran consumer product, we sold it to PayPal. And I was commuting to San Jose. I'm not a big company person. And there was a moment where I was just like, I am so burnt out. And I'm so exhausted. And by the way, I'm not enjoying any of this great life I have built. I have so many I'll be happy wins, and I'm actually not here for any of the moments. And I reached into the pocket in front of me on the plane. And there was a book by Tony Hsieh, Delivering Happiness, The History of Zappos. It was interesting. I read it, and the appendix was all this research on happiness. And remember, I'm a Russian Jew who's good at suffering, so my first thought is, this is such BS. Who studies happiness? I don't come from a country where that's a high value at all. But that led me on a journey to actually try to find a different way, because I'll be happy when was burning me out, and I was just being happy and miserable all the time. And one of the crazy things I discovered, and this is what I'm asking you, the second thing to think about, is all the scientific research showed that there are actually these simple, scientifically proven skills and practices that if we make them part of our daily life, they actually fundamentally change our brain chemistry, and they fundamentally improve our emotional health. And the habit that the research talked the most about was gratitude. And by the way, to this, my reaction was, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what I'm saying, but this is such bullshit. Because I thought it was this cheesy thing. I kind of had the reaction. It wasn't just woo, it was I'm so complicated and sophisticated, and I'm so intelligent, and I've worked so hard, and I'm not happy. Being grateful for a few things every day is going to make a difference. I had, this very rejection to this, but I decided to try it as an experiment. Long story short, the experiment, and I thought it would fail, and then I would be so smug and I'm special. Gratitude doesn't work for me. But 11,000 research studies are not wrong, and so when you develop a grateful mindset, it's essentially the antidote to that negativity bias. Because when you ask your brain, there's actually a part of our brain, the anterior cingulate, it's part of our brain that focuses on things. When you ask it to, can you please focus on something good? it naturally stops its tendencies to look for something bad. Research shows if you do that consistently for just 3 weeks, your brain actually automatically starts to look for good things. You change the chemistry. So I felt the difference in my life in such a dramatic way, and I was so inspired that I started a company called Happier. The first thing we built was an app that became the largest app in the world to help people collect gratitude moments and share them. I think something like 8 million moments at this point. And we were learning that was changing people's lives. It was amazing, and this would be like such a great end to the story. So we just learned that happiness does not come from outside achievements. It comes when you focus on something you can appreciate in your daily life because you counter your negativity bias. This would be amazing, like end of the hero's journey from the refugee to the project. This, except a few years ago, I was actually giving a TEDx talk here in Boston, one of the largest stages for TEDx talks, and you'd think it was the greatest day of my life, and it was the darkest day of my life. At this point, I was hardly functioning as a wife, mother, human, so I was a horrible CEO. I was almost catatonic, and what happened, I didn't realize it in retrospect, is I was using gratitude as a Band-Aid to put it all on top of all the negative emotions I didn't want to feel. I never allowed myself ever to feel fear or self-doubt or anxiety or to ever admit them to anyone. Well, we live in a world that tells us, turn that frown upside negative into the positiveness. I've never seen an entrepreneur stand up and say, I have a lot of self-doubt. I've never heard that. And so it all spilled out. And without going into detail, you can read a lot of detail in my book. It was pretty scary to share all this, but that brought me to the other thing, the other mind shift that I had to make about happiness is that happiness is not about feeling positive all the time. That yes, a part of happiness is through gratitude, through other connections, is to find more joy in everyday moments. But there's this huge other missing half, and that is to learn how to embrace and be okay with our difficult feelings because they are not negative, they're not wrong, we have them, we're human beings. And it is a skill. Do you know that when you acknowledge a difficult emotion, when you say it or write it down, you feel it for a shorter amount of time and with less intensity? And so that was a huge other skill I had to learn, and so from that came our Happier Work program and my book, and we kind of articulate that. And so what I'm inviting you to change is three mindsets around happiness, is that it is not something that you can earn your way into by working very, very hard and achieving enough. Actually, when we do that, most of us are trying to feel like we are enough. I know that's what I ultimately was trying to do. So it's not that. It is actually something that we have to learn to practice to find in our daily lives. The second is that happiness is not a feeling that we get to nirvana and we feel. It's actually a skill. It's something that we do, and so there's 5 skills that I talk about in my work and my book. It's acceptance, including of difficult emotions, gratitude, intentional kindness, connecting to our sense of meaning, which is, I could do a separate talk about that, and then self-care, mostly self-compassion. So happiness is a skill. And the third mind shift is that it is not about feeling positive all the time. That part of it, yes, is to find more joy in our everyday moments, and gratitude helps with that, and so does kindness. But it's also about learning how to embrace the difficult emotions, how to get through them with compassion and resilience. And that's what I'm doing in the world. And I can tell you that, speaking just to wrap it up with the connections, as you mentioned, the last chapter of my book is called Becoming a Force of Good in the World. Because one of the skepticisms I had, even as I was learning all this and it was changing my life and saving my marriage and allowing me to do better work, when I actually learned to be okay with saying I feel sad or I have doubt or I'm standing in front of a group of very successful and accomplished people, and I can tell you guys that, yeah, my book came out 6 weeks ago and I'm very excited, but I have a lot of self-doubt and I have a lot of fear. What if not a lot of people buy it, right? Like, I'm okay now saying that. So even with all that, I always have this fear, happiness, isn't it selfish to do so much work on our own happiness? And so the thing I want to leave you with is that we all have people in life we love and we want to be happier and healthier. There's a lot of problems in our world that we all want to solve. Well, the best way you can do that, the best way we can help people we love, the best way we can come up with all these solutions to all the problems we have is to cultivate these skills within ourselves. Because research shows 2 things. Happier people are more productive, more creative, more altruistic. They have better relationships, they're more innovative, and as you mentioned, as Justin mentioned, happiness spreads. So you don't have to make anyone, you don't have to teach anyone, you just have to practice these skills yourselves, and you can become a force of good in your world. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm supposed to say, I will, because so many people have been asking, my book is out front for sale, and I will stay after and sign books. So many people have asked. So when we're done, I will go and sign books. Thank you.
Well, you can stay here, if you can sit, but you can walk
I will
too if
sit, I
you
will
need
sit, I
to,
will
it's
sit
totally
now.
fine, either way.
Now I'll sit.
Justin, I'd like to invite you to come as well, and just bring your mic with you. So, thank you all so much, so much rich information. I feel like we could just sit here for another several hours and hear all of your stories and the wisdom that you bring. But I want to ask a question from all of you, and how is wellness changing the future of business, given that we spend a third of our life at work? So how are we seeing the wellness industry and well-being? How is it coming more into the day-to-day work model? I'd like to hear it from all of you.
It's me. Okay. That's a good question. It's, because what do we do to make ourselves more productive, but at the same time happier, more fulfilled? And that's basically doing something that you love. People ask me, when are you going to retire? I'm a little bit older now. And I said, no. People ask me, when are you going to retire? Right? And I say, as soon as I stop loving what I do. Right? But I'm loving what I do. Why would I want to retire? And I feel fulfilled, and I see things change, people's lives change all the time. So for me, that's what brings me into my world and shares wellness with the world. Because without me being that way, I can't help others.
So Habitus is a certified B Corp. So there's this tiny and not yet that well-known community of companies that have made a commitment to treat their workers well, to take care of the environment, and there's actually a certification you have to do. So it's verified, and the certification takes forever, but it's worth doing. And I was at their retreat for New England B Corps this past Tuesday, and this group of companies is recognizing that both it's the right thing to do, but also it's the wise thing to do to run a business in a way that actually takes care of the people who work there. And so a lot of businesses are starting to invest in services like Nataly's, of like, how do you actually bring wellness into the way you take care of your people, like what CIC is doing. And we end up on the fringe of that because we do communication skills. And so we get brought in as people are trying to think about, how do we make more democratic decisions? How do we help resolve conflicts at work? And that kind of stuff, turns out, is not that straightforward. And so you need to have some people to support you. So that's the role we end up playing. But as we're in the peripheries of that, because that's really just the fringe of the sort of wellness shift that's happening, we're watching more and more companies ask the question, what does it take for you to bring your full self to work? What do you need from us in order to empower you to really be fully present? So I see this sort of as coming as a wave, and one of the cool things about B Corps, most people don't know what they are. It doesn't drive consumer behavior dramatically, but hiring, it is hard to get a job at a B Corp because everybody wants to work at a B Corp. There's a website called B-Works, I think, where you can search for jobs. It's a job board only at B Corps. And we don't have any trouble finding amazing people because everybody wants to work at a B Corp and retention is amazing. So it's starting to send a message that this is the direction business has to go if you want to be competitive. And you look at the Silicon Valley where it's really hard to find a good engineer that's not just going to get poached by somebody else. The way they're doing it is with trying to create a space of wellness.
Sure. Okay. So I just want to start by throwing out some numbers at you guys, which shocked me when I started to do this research in the workplace. So 85% of American workers say they're either very stressed or overwhelmed with stress. That's crazy to me. You want to know another number that's crazy to me? Is only 30% of American employees say they are engaged with their jobs. That means 70% of us, so 70% of people in this room were just showing up or were disengaged in some way. So to me, that is nuts because we got one life. Well, you don't believe other things. Okay, this physical body gets one life. Okay, my soul may go on. God, I would be so tired. But think about that. And so as we have started to bring our training, I developed this Happier at Work program. It developed very organically because I would get on these big stages and talk, and then I would just have like this line of executives lined up, and half of them were like, can you help me? I'm really struggling. And the other was, can I bring this to my company? So that's how the program evolved. We found there's 3 kinds of companies. I'm really generalizing. The first kind of companies, they know these numbers, they recognize this problem, and their way to think about it, this is not my problem. You know, my employee, they gotta figure this crap out. Like, you know, if there's a fire, if someone has like, you know, an episode at work, we'll deal with it. But this is not our problem. I think those companies are either not gonna be around or they'll have to see the light. But there are tons of these companies, I just wanna be really honest, where when I meet them and they hear this stuff, they're like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. That's for like, you go to Kropalik, that's like woo, you know, they don't care about the research. The second category of companies, they recognize that the research that shows when employees are happier, they are not just more productive, they are more creative, they are more innovative. Happier employees help each other more, they deliver better customer service. It's a whole virtuous cycle. Happier people help others more at work. When you help others more, you feel happier. Amazing stuff happens. There's research that shows companies where there's higher employee job satisfaction are more profitable. They are less likely to lose money on healthcare and sick days. So there's a category of companies, they understand all this, and they are starting to tip their toe. So they're doing a little bit of wellness programming, they're a little bit of fitness tracking, a little bit. But they're kind of in this place of like, can we just do a little bit and like check that off? And then there's a category of companies, and I love these companies because they're coming and they're saying, our strategic advantage is the emotional health of our leaders and our employees. It is the only other thing that we have left. We cannot squeeze out more productivity. Like 10 years ago, you know, it was all about like productivity and bullet journals and like, but they recognize we cannot squeeze. We're all working nonstop. Work-life balance. I was invited the other day to speak on a work-life balance. I had to sit on a panel. I said, I have nothing to say about work-life balance. It does not exist. There's a shift, there's a blend, but we all working too much. And that category of companies recognizes, and this is our pitch to them, is the greatest unrealized asset you have in your company is the emotional health of your leaders and your employees. And these companies are seeing it as a strategic advantage. And they are amazing. And the thing is, it's the same, I'm gonna draw an analogy that may sound really weird, but the same way that like, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, and this whole thing of like, let's invest more in female entrepreneurs. I always say, yes, but let's not do it to be nice. Let's do it because we're able to uncover markets that we're not seeing. Those companies are not throwing these wellness benefits at employees just to like be nice or check off. They are doing it because it is better for the company. It is also better for the people. And it's amazing to see those companies, and I think they will be the leaders. But I just want to share that there are those 3 categories. And so sometimes I have this whiplash from talking to one company and then to another where I'm having the same conversation and the reaction is different. But one thing, I just end on an optimistic note, I am very encouraged because there are more and more companies that are recognizing that link, that it's not just about being nice to their employees, which is wonderful, but that's hard to prove to your shareholders. That creates the conflict. Shareholders or employees. And there's more and more of these companies where like, no, we're excited to tell our shareholders that we're spending money on a happiness training program because research shows that this is going to do X, Y, Z. And so I see optimism, but there's absolutely those 3. And I think CIC is fantastic in hopefully turning more and more into that 3rd strategic investment category.
That sounds great. How do you guys think? Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, well, Nataly has her book out there, and she's going to be signing books, so go and speak with her. And Justin, I'm not sure, are you going to hang around a little bit? And then Ted and Charles have something set up in Venture Cafe that you can go and learn more about that app. So thanks for coming. And in about 15 minutes, we're going to have a panel of 5 different company owners and startups, and they're going to be answering a few questions in a panel discussion. So see you in 15.